up here. I voted for you. Wait a minute. That guy on the grassy knoll's got a gun. He's gonna shoot the president. Holy smokes, I've got to do something. All right, Lee. Time to become an American hero.
Ep.107 Media proudly present to you the Lone Gunman Podcast with your host, Rob Clark, where research comes to shine and myths comes to die. Stay tuned, be right there.
Mark Lane, lawyer and former New York State Assemblyman, was the gadfly of the Warren Commission. He demanded the right to appear before it as a defense counsel for the dead Lee Harvey Oswald. Refused, he began his own investigation of the president's death. A study that produced first the best-selling attack on the Warren Commission, Rush to Judgment, and now a movie of the same name. Mark Lane has lectured all over the world on his own theories of the assassination, theories which he spelled out for Bill Stout.
There was one conclusion, one basic conclusion that the Commission reached, I think, which can be supported by the facts, and that was the Commission's conclusion that Ruby killed Oswald. But of course that took place on television. It would have been very difficult to deny that. But outside of that, there's not an important conclusion which can be supported by the facts, and this is the problem.
But Mr. Lane, who accuses the Commission of playing fast and loose with the evidence, does not always allow facts to get in the way of his own theories. As for Mr. Brim, Eddie Barker discovered that he holds no brief either for the grassy knoll theory or for the use of his words by Mark Lane.
Well, now, some critics of the Warren Report have taken your testimony or interviews with you to indicate that you thought the shots came from behind the fence over there. What about that?
Well, sir, it was not a number of critics. It was one critic, Mark Lane, who takes very great liberties with adding to my quotation. I never said that any shot came from here like I was quoted by Mr. Lane. Mr. Lane would like me to have positively identified what I saw fly over here as skull, although I told him I could not. I did not I thought it was, but I could not. So he has added his interpretations to what I said, and consequently that's where the story comes from, that I said that a shot come from up there. No shot came from up there at any time during the whole fiasco that afternoon.
Nor are these the only examples of Mr. Lane lifting remarks out of context to support his theories.
Attorney Mark Lane, who went to Jonestown on an independent investigation, told me on October 3rd that no one is being held by the People's Temple against his will.
They're told that this person wants to leave. The American embassy and the first consul, who I believe is related to the Central Intelligence Agency, goes there with a car, has an individual meeting with the individual involved, and says, and they've repeated this to me, both the embassy and the people involved, here's a car, there's no one to stop you. If you like, come in the car, we will drive you back, we have a plane waiting, we'll fly you to Georgetown, there's a ticket, and we'll pay for your flight right back to your home, and no one can stop us. Do you want to go? And they say, no, I don't want to go.
Tonight, Lane has become part of the mystery. As the lawyer for the settlement, he had written Leo Ryan recently, threatening lawsuits if the temple was maligned by Ryan's investigation. Lane was with Ryan during yesterday's massacre, but today he is reported missing. Merrill Lee Beck, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the show. This is episode number 107 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Clark, and with me here today is author of Two Princes and a King, which you can find at Amazon, Kindle and paperback, and proprietor of the Neapolis Media Group, Mr. Carmine Sabastano, joins me. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. How you been, Rob?
Great. Couldn't be better. I love listening to funny audio, you know?
Yeah?
Yeah. I do a pretty funny show sometimes, I think.
We have our moments.
Yeah, we have our moments. And, so do a couple other shows. I was kind of, picking on the old JKF show that Fetzer does over there with Gary King and Larry Rivera and Don Fox. And they've been doing this piece recently where, Jim DiEugenio from Black Op Radio, he wrote this thing of the rise and fall of Jim Fetzer. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I saw something about that, but I'm sure I'll learn a few things listening to you about
it. I don't blame you for not reading it. But anyway, I think they're on like part 4 on the JKF show. This is 4 hours worth of rebutting Jim DiEugenio's article point by point. It's riveting radio. Fetzer answering himself about why he has not risen and fallen off.
It's riveting, or it just feels like rivets being driven into your head listening to Fetzer for that long.
Yeah, that's a little more accurate. And I actually heard vaguely a reference to myself on Black Op Radio this week. Sadly, they didn't give me any credit or mention the name of the show, but one of their listeners asked Jim DiEugenio if, he had heard my podcast and was wondering if there was any validity to, Frazier bringing Oswald to work every day. And DiEugenio kind of dismissed it, and I really don't think he's more of a macro guy, instead of a micro guy. When it comes to like specifics of things, he's not too keen on them, because this was his answer. Well, I don't think Frazier took Oswald to work every day. It was just certain days because Oswald had a bus pass. That was it. That was his answer. Because Oswald had a bus pass, he doesn't think Frazier brought him to work every day.
Well, I mean, it's possible. I don't think that rules out the fact, though, that he could have driven with Frazier consistently quite a lot of time. I mean, you can only go off of what you have from the witnesses saying and what the evidence says. So, I mean, there's also a lot of other possibilities that could come out of it, but, it's not like you can lay that as a dismissal. It doesn't really dismiss your ideas about Frazier or, what his comments were.
Well, no, nor the other 5 eyewitnesses that said he did. So, and of course, none of that got mentioned. But it is what it is. And then, he writes this scathing review of Caulfield's new book, General Walker and the Murder of President Kennedy. And I mean, it was brutal. Did you get a chance to read that?
I did read a little bit of that, yeah. Yeah, I did. Once again, like the other article, as you know, I try to keep my head down. I get involved when I need to, but previous engagements that you and I and others, trying to keep people credible, sometimes it's just a black hole where they want to argue for the end of time, despite the fact that you've just proven what they've said.
Well, I think part of it is, if the CIA, if it doesn't mention the CIA or Alan Dulles, then DiEugenio is going to shred your book. And, how fair is that? But
yeah, no, there's, I think everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people do have preconceived notions that they're staunchly defending, rather than sometimes just realizing, we are all going to be wrong at points. It's so much easier just to admit that you're wrong, or admit that you don't have definitive proof. A lot of people like to claim that they have definitive proof when they don't. No one has the smoking gun. If they did, they would have come out with it, and they'd be famous and have written a book.
True.
So, we're all just trying to put the pieces together that we have access to. And sometimes when the pieces won't fit in a logical manner, some people try to shove them into the puzzle.
Well, we'll just leave it at that. And we'll just know we're listening. That's all. And today, why I wanted to have you on the show, Carmine, is we're going to be talking about one of the most iconic figures associated with the case, and that is Mr. Mark Lane.
Yes, he's very well known throughout the case, has been ever since he started to disagree with the commission at public events in the 60s, and eventually wrote a best-selling book and did at least 2 movies that I know of, and I think he wrote at least 4 to 6 books.
Right. Now, of course, I wasn't around, and neither were you, when back in the the early '60s when all this was happening, in chronological order here.
Mm-hmm.
You probably like me, became acquainted with the work of Mark Lane much later, and we have to we're looking back at it. But when I first, after one of my hiatuses from JFK research, I took a couple years off there for a little while, just to clear my mind and get the hell away from it for a little while. And then you slowly come back, 'cause sometimes you need to take a little break. But I remember I was Mark Lane's last book, The Last Word. Okay. I remember hearing that this was coming out and it was going to be this, this great book, and it's, he's finally going to name names and this, that, and the other, and have all this proof. So I said, okay, well, let me go get this book, and I'll get, stick my feet back in the water here again. And I read the book, and I have never been so disappointed with a book, I think, in my entire life. I mean, it was, I don't know if you've read it or not, but it was a brutal letdown.
No, I never read it, but I would contend that there are probably a couple other people's books in the community we might be able to think of that were worse.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, this is, 300 pages of nothing. And I mean nothing other than what he's been saying for all these years. The CIA did it. No specifics, no nothing, no new evidence, no smoking guns, no nothing. Just 300 pages of drivel. Drivel. And I think what it was, what happened was, originally the book The Last Word was part of his biography, or his autobiography. And I think the publishing house said, this is way too long. It might be a better idea if we split these up into 2 different books. So I don't think he was meant to write this great last word, on the Kennedy assassination as its standalone book. And when you take away, the autobiographical part, and then you're left with the remnants over here on this side, I think that's what happened. But I don't know. Like, if I could have got my money back for a book, I would have asked for it for this one, most definitely. Because he got me.
Nice. Throw in a book review before we really get started.
Oh, we're started, brother. We are full in. But anyway, let's rewind. And, looking into Mark Lane is kind of like a nebulous black hole that doesn't really have a beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, if you're trying to find anything out about Mark Lane before 1956, good luck. Maybe except you might find when he was born. But other than that, it's pretty nebulous as far as if he had military service, if he went to law school.
Well, I did see one document that said he served in the Army, I believe it was.
Yeah, but what years, where, what branch?
Yeah, not tons of specifics.
I mean, how nebulous is this? But, I guess going back, the earliest that I really found anything on Mr. Mark Lane, and let me pull it up here, because I thought it really, really interesting, because a couple shows ago, I believe it was talking about William Duff,
mm-hmm.
and various of those allegations and everything, and what what Oswald was doing in Clinton, as far as disrupting the Committee on Racial Equality, the core voting drive. And, what basically that could accomplish, or what they were trying to accomplish by doing that. And everybody's going to see the picture for this podcast. And yes, it's Mark Lane in his mugshot looking very, very sad. And that comes from the Harlem Core, which is the Harlem, New York Committee on Racial Equality's attorney, as, what was it, Freedom Rider? Yeah, he was arrested in 1961 in Jackson as a Freedom Rider.
Yeah.
He was arrested with some guy named Percy Sutton. Both men not only represented Harlem Core, but many of the Freedom Riders. He was the attorney for the very first arrest of Harlem Core members in the 1963 City Hall protest. He was a New York State Assemblyman at the time. He went on to become a notable attorney for and witness to the civil rights and anti-war movements. And here's a little known fact about him. In 1968, Mark Lane ran for vice president on the Freedom and Peace Man party ticket with tap dancing Dick Gregory, who I guess was running for president.
They also wrote a book together.
Yes, Murder in Memphis, about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. He would go on to represent James Earl Ray, who was King's assassin before the House Select Committee on Assassinations, among other notable people that we'll get to. So, yeah. That was 1961, and this is what he was into. He seems to me to be very politically involved for a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lane has always, when he was, doing his work in these cases, always been in the public and, doing events, drumming up support, involved with various political groups, which at times, some people found questionable. And, he's always found a way to frame it as being beneficial, where, obviously, where most people, they're trying to get people behind their cause. He has always seemed to be out in front. Like, for instance, I sent you that interview where he talked with the grandfather of conservatism, they call him, Buckley, William F. Buckley.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. And they both had agendas, They both had agendas. They both had political axes to grind. But you can see him and Buckley both operating with very carefully chosen words and attempting to trap each other in conversation.
You forgot they were both CIA.
Yeah.
Did I just say that? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carmine.
Nice. So, which has been claimed about both of them. And we know from some of the documents that there are other possible agendas involved as well.
Oh, yes. All right. So, look, we're gonna step through this. We're gonna start back, way back, because this show's about the Kennedy assassination. So, I guess we should get kind of topical now. And I guess start us off, Carmine, if you will, with the first document. We're going to be talking about the Mannlicher Carcano rifle.
Yep.
According to Mark Lane.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, that's the thing, is that, a lot of problems have developed over the years, which were fueled by some of the accusations that Mark Lane and Roger Craig made, that the weapon that was initially recovered from the Texas School Book Depository was a Mauser. And that erroneous description did actually get into at least one official document, and it did get passed around and repeated by others, including Henry Wade, who was the district attorney of Dallas. And also Malcolm Kilduff, the press secretary, said it during one of the interviews that it was a Mauser. So it got passed around, and it just developed into this myth that has hung around ever since. There are people still today arguing that it was a Mauser based on some of these original accusations. So before I get into, I just want to make it clear that, as much as we want to get to the depth, no emotion, there were good things that Lane did. There
Yes.
were some good things.
To
He
be
did
fair,
interview he did interview witnesses disregarded by the Warren Commission. He did appear in the media and was among the first to suggest any idea of conspiracy. And he did debate officials and celebrities on the feasible problems of the Warren Commission case. He attempted to represent Oswald's interest in the commission, but was denied. So he did do some good things, but no one is black or white. No one is, it's shades of gray. He did other things too, and some of those things we're going to review in the documents that might explain why some of the myths and other things have sprouted up over the years.
Yeah, and it's not in the documents, but I will say that he did so. He was denied by the Warren Commission to represent Lee Harvey Oswald's interests, but he did so kind of in absentia in an article written for The Guardian at the time. I think he went through 15 different sticking points that the Warren Commission were accusing Lee Harvey Oswald of, and he took it point by point and he broke it down and explained, where the problems were with each accusation. And he submitted this paper or article, whatever it was, to the Warren Commission and said, look, if you're not going to have me, at least take this, look at it, look at it. If you have any questions, let me know, but take this into consideration, please. Now, I've heard the description, everybody out there has heard the description of lawyers as ambulance chasers, right? Well, I've seen Mark Lane described as a hearse chaser. Now, that's a very grim description, but considering everything that this man's been associated with throughout his career, and look, I don't blame the man. If he's a smart guy, he wants to make a name for himself. He wants to, get involved in something he believes strongly in. Then, he did what anyone would in his position would have done. Any typical lawyer, of course they want to become notable. They want to become a name. And you know what I'm saying? How lawyers, they take the big cases, even if they're going to lose, just to get their name out there. They want to be infamous and noteworthy, and they want all the rich people to want to hire them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially, he took on a lot of murder cases, for a lot of cases against young people, people of color. So, he did do a lot of good things, but I'm not sure it was all for the right reasons. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. The agendas are not as well known to us. And a lot of people, I think, in any case, because he did some good things, like a lot of people have, some people ascribe almost a sainthood to certain people, that they can do no wrong and that anything they've said that was wrong doesn't need to be corrected. But that's not true. If we're going to operate off of the facts and the evidence that we can present legally, then it has to be right. And if someone was wrong, they have to correct the error. If they don't, you're just going to lead to decades and decades. I saw a message, I think it was 2013, that Mark Lane had forwarded that was put on JFK Facts, Jefferson Morley's site, where he said that everybody needs to start getting along and not worrying about some of the, the sticking points between us. Well, some of the sticking points are important.
Yeah.
If we want to be credible, then yeah, we do have to work those things out. We can't just all hold hands and march towards freedom. That's not the way it works.
No. Sadly, no. But he did. I give him credit. He went straight to Marguerite and was like, look, because I don't think Marguerite was paying him anything. She didn't have any money. He was doing it for recognition back then.
And he went on speaking engagements and to tours and stuff like that too as well. So
yeah.
It paid off in the long run as far as establishing his name.
Yeah, but that's not the only reason either. I'm sure he did see an injustice in the way that Oswald's civil liberties were abused.
Yeah, being trampled on. Yeah.
Yeah, by not giving a lawyer and being murdered in police custody. These are big red flags. And, he stepped in because there was nobody else to do it. Basically, he saw an opportunity and he took it. And I can't blame the man for doing it. And it was the beginning for him of a very long and illustrious career, and associated himself with very, very high profile cases.
Mm-hmm. So I think that, yeah, as we were saying, one of the big attributions to Mark Lane is the Mauser claim, and I suppose it's more one of the big attributions to Roger Craig that Lane just gave him a forum a few times with his movies and in his writings to present that.
Right.
But according to the evidence that we have, and there's more, I wrote that article a while back about A Tale of Too Many Rifles, where, there's dozens of pieces of evidence. I just tried to give us the three that I thought were very convincing and very strong as far as, or four. One I don't have a document for, but it's the Alea film. So the first one is from the House Select Committee on Assassinations Administration folders, and it gives a write-up and a summary of the similarity between the weapons, a Mauser and a man like a Carcano. Now, the Mauser is of great similarity to the Carcano. The Carcano is also known as the Mauser Paravicino, which
Right.
is the Carcano was a modified design of the Mauser itself. It just had different bolt action and different placement on the gun where everything was. But they look very similar. And all of the Dallas police that initially said that it was a Mauser, and the Sheriff's Department employees that said it was a Mauser, besides Roger Craig, all later, when they learned that they were wrong, changed what they said. They said they had made a mistake, which wouldn't be the first. There were dozens of mistakes made. So I think that it's more than reasonable to understand why a mistaken description would have happened when they didn't do a close inspection and they never touched the weapon.
I was saying, yeah, I mean, the gun was stamped made in Italy, but these, they wouldn't have really, it wouldn't have really meant anything to them at that point in time.
Yeah.
It was just, it could have been a piece of the gun that was made in Italy. They weren't thinking that, it was Italian-made carbine, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It's an understandable misidentification, but an unfortunate one because it has made its way into the lore.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and if you look at the problem too is that even Weitzman, who was the one who had most chance of being able to identify it, later when he was under testimony, he stated, it was just a glance. People have been asking me for a long time ever since, and he just glanced at the weapon. So I don't think it's anyone necessarily to blame. It's just a circumstance that occurred in all the confusion and with the weight of the event that had happened. A lot of those people had no clue that this was going, they could have never put themselves into the right frame of mind to work that day after what had happened. So we have to deal with the best that we could get, and that's what we dealt with.
Exactly. I mean, it's assassination of a president. They're thrown into a blender. It's like a Keystone Cop situation because everything's unorganized as hell. The search of the building is unorganized. Locking the building down is unorganized. Trying to figure out exactly what happened with people milling around everywhere is, it's just unorganized as can be. And of course, people want answers as quickly as possible. They want information as quickly as possible. So, these guys are doing the best they can, I guess, in a very, very stressful situation. But
yeah, and not to say that, they're not also, like you and I know for sure, having seen a lot of the documents, there were suppressions. They weren't necessarily, people want to make them nefarious and attach them to the assassination, but they were nefarious attached to other things that they wanted to hide, and they didn't want people to find out what they were doing.
Yeah, and to swing it back to Mark Lane a little bit, he was, back at this time, he's kind of creeping. Everybody's seen his little movie with Roger Craig and all that, but this happened after, of course, he made Rush to Judgment. And, of course, Rush to Judgment happened after the Warren Commission came out. I think it was in 1966 when he made the movie.
Yep.
Not sure when the book was
and the
published.
movie. I believe the book and the movie were right around the same time.
Okay. Yeah, because I think him and Weisberg were having a pissing match about who got the first book out or something to that effect. Weisberg wasn't a really big Mark Lane fan. In fact, a lot of these early researchers were not fans of Mark Lane because he didn't really play well with others. He wanted the spotlight all to himself. That's why you never saw Mark Lane with any other researchers sharing research back then, or going on a show with the other researchers. No, it was him versus the world, and that's the way he wanted it, and that's the way it was.
Yeah, Lane definitely knew how to promote himself, and I would agree that, in my opinion, too, he didn't like to share the spotlight. He liked to be the lone expert and the end all be all of the conversation.
Yeah, let me read you a description somebody wrote of Mark Lane. Okay.
Okay.
This might make everybody see him in a different light. Were I a dog, I would have growled when Mark Lane came around. Watch out for the guys who come in fast, Cookie Passetti once told me, meaning that the type of guy who comes through the front door in a hurry, talking a busy streak as he breezes up to the bar, is invariably going to borrow money or cash a check that will go to the moon and bounce back. Perhaps it was Lane's speed that turned me off. He moved about the world at a road runner's pace, a commercially minded crusader, developing President Kennedy's murder into a solid multimedia property. Lane produced a book, Rush to Judgment, which sold like a Bible beach ball at a Baptist resort, a movie of the same name which consisted largely of on-the-street interviews with witnesses who said Oswald went this way, not that way, and a long-playing record on which, for the price of an LP, you could hear Lane's testimony to the Warren Commission, consisting, if my recollection is correct, of Lane telling the commission he knew something they didn't know, but he couldn't tell them what it was. Lane's paranoia had a showbiz cloak and dagger frosting. While making his movie, he slunk around Dallas using an alias and lying to witnesses about who he really was and what his agenda was, as if that would fool those conspirators who had been smart enough to bump off the president and get away with it. Lane had a tendency to grab bits of evidence like a seagull swooping down to snap up a fish, swallowing it whole without taking time to see if anything was digestible. This procedure got Lane in trouble in 1970 when the Kennedy assassination business was experiencing a recession, and Lane decided to diversify into the fertile field of Vietnam atrocities. He wrote a book purporting to be based on interviews with American soldiers who admitted to various barbarisms and tortures. The gimmick was that the soldiers did not take refuge in anonymity, but allowed Lane to print their names. However, Neil Sheehan, ace war correspondent for the New York Times, revealed in a blitzing review of Lane's book that the muckraker's report of an alleged Nazi working the Vietnam atrocity circuit on behalf of Uncle Sam, one of Lane's soldiers, confessed that his father was a former bloodlust SS officer serving as a United States Army colonel in Vietnam, was deficient, and that the Nazi did not possess name, rank, or serial number in the U.S. Army. So, there you have, and I'm trying to find out who wrote this, because that is brutal. I'm not even sure who wrote it, to be honest with you. I just found it on the internet. It's just like a little bit of a scathing, a scathing bit on their impressions of Mark Lane from somebody who knew him. So, not favorable.
Well, yeah, no, and it's going to be mixed review depending. I think though that some of the stuff that we have, it's worthy of consideration. But I think that some of the other stuff, that we're going to get into once we finish with the Mauser, speaks to some of the allegations that were in that.
Oh yeah, we'll get to the witnesses, but yeah, please continue.
Oh, it's okay. So this one, I hope that everybody will just check it out. I do believe YouTube has versions, and some JFK research sites should. It's the Alea film, and it provides footage of the Dallas police suspecting the original weapon found at the scene, and the weapon, from all review that has been able to be verified, is a Carcano. Now, that's important because the whole incidents that Lane and others have tried to suggest of weapon switching, it's pretty hard to do when Alea was right there on time, just after the discovery, taped them pulling it out, and then gave the tape to his fellow reporter so it was broadcast, and the Dallas police couldn't alter anything.
Right. And we have pictures of a Carcano coming out of the Texas School Book Depository.
Yeah. So, The one big point that people have tried, that I actually went and found this document because I had heard about it so many times, but I never understood why Lane or other people didn't present it. In claiming that the Mauser, because it is accurate, Lane claims that there was a CIA document that used the word Mauser. It doesn't mean it was a Mauser, but it ignores the timing and the context of the document cited. The document's drafted just days later, and it's feasibly based upon the incorrect assumptions of some Dallas police and the public announcement of DA Henry Wade. So the agency got a hold of this. They put it in. They tried to make a summary report to send back to headquarters, and the Mauser got thrown in. Now, the mistakes are just some of the many that Dallas police made that weekend, and the information was often garbled, incorrect, and disputed under the circumstances. The agency also noted that the gun was ordered from Klein's to Oswald's P.O. box, and that used the alias Alec Heidel. But each is an attribute of the Carcano, not the Mauser. And additionally, the agency attributes Oswald's guilt just days after his arrest and membership in a political group he was never a member of. So they could get things wrong. They got some in the same document wrong.
Well, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for the FBI to get something wrong. Believe me.
Definitely. Yeah, the agency and the FBI get stuff wrong all the time. They're human. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I just explained a big, huge FBI gaffe in the Billy Lovelady show concerning that stupid shirt he had on when they told him to come down and get his picture taken. That they told him, no, don't bother wearing the shirt, just wear whatever you got on. And then when they wrote the report up to send to Hoover, some idiot wrote in the report, oh, this is what he said he was wearing on November 22nd, 1963.
Yeah, because they didn't want to go back and re-interview him, maybe.
Yeah, thus just creating 50 years of nonsensical horseshit. But anyway, that's just me.
Okay, so final thing on the Mauser. Additionally, there is an FBI recording of a meeting of the Citizens Committee of Inquiry, an organization that Lane gave a speech to in '66. And among Lane's problems that he announced to those people, that was recorded by an informant to the FBI, was he discussed that the Dallas police incorrectly called the murder weapon a Mauser when it was proved to have been an Italian-made gun.
So that's a little contradictory, don't you think? If he's wanting to try to make money off of the story that it was a Mauser, but yet he's telling everybody that the Dallas police screwed up their identification, which they did.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think initially he agreed with what happened, and then he ended up making that movie with Craig where, it got pushed home the whole Mauser idea in reverse of what he had already said.
Unbelievable. Because,
it's like you were saying, trying to get his name out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure, look, he ain't doing this for free, brother. He went on like the national tour. I mean, this dude was speaking all over the country, at colleges, any place that was put up a billboard outside that said, hey, Mark Lane's going to talk about the Warren Commission here. And he's charging an admission, right? I'm sure.
That's in the files too.
Yeah. And he's talking to any kind of group that'll want to have him, and anybody that'll listen, anybody that'll pay their dollar to come see him, he'll be there. I mean, he was all over the country, man, back in the 60s. And like I just read, things kind of cooled off a bit, in the early 70s. So he kind of branched out into other things. And then, as we'll talk about later, branched out into even more crazy things.
Yeah. The thing, another thing is that, it's very unfortunate that so much time, I mean, not just this show, but I'm sure hundreds of other shows and thousands of hours has had to have been dedicated by people to get all this evidence to show that it wasn't a Mauser, because so many people, it just makes it so neat. It's just a neat one-off line that hopefully you can undo, which is, Lane liked giving a good line, and it was just one thing you could say that would confound people unless they actually went to the documents, and we weren't given access till the 90s anyway when the AARB came out. So
yeah, and a lot of people accuse Mark Lane of being a lot of things, like a Nazi. I mean, Mae Brussel didn't like Mark Lane whatsoever, didn't trust him as far as she could throw him. People accused him of being a communist, having communist ties and sympathies, not just for wanting to, represent Oswald, but just because of his, the way his ideals were. He was, I guess he wanted, to help the blacks and to help immigrants, to help those less fortunate, and to people back then, that was looked at as kind of, socialist or communist ideologies.
Yeah. Well, I think that that's true. I think we should definitely look at it in the color of the actions that were being done. From the documents that you and I reviewed, the summary document and the other document that the FBI put out on some of Lane's connections, there are questions that I think are reasonable. Questions that are reasonable to ask, but we also got to remember that Hoover had that same thing that Angleton did in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he wanted to believe everything was communist. Hoover had that same disease of the mind that Angleton did, always wanting to blame the communists for everything. But there are multiple connections. I mean, we have the one document, the summary document, that states that Mark Lane from 1953 to 1961 was a member of, held positions in, attendant functions of, or otherwise was associated with the National Lawyers Guild, cited by the House Committee on Un-American Activities as a communist front.
Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, but we also have to remember, too, that was McCarthy. He was looking, too. He wanted to make any associations with anyone. They didn't want Lane investigating the Kennedy case, so this would have been a nice, convenient way to get rid of him, because he had some associations that, are not unreasonable to think that they're connected to communism.
Well, this is what they did back then. If they didn't agree with what you were doing, you're a communist. I mean, it's a communist organization. It's a communist front. You're a communist. You're a commie lover, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so we definitely need to balance that out, but there are definitely reasonable questions, because it's, Lane was a speaker at multiple events for additional organizations linked to the Communist Party. The FBI in their document state that Lane received Communist Party support in 1962 for his congressional election.
Mm-hmm.
And he appeared in the Daily Worker as an officer of one of the aforementioned groups. And we know the Daily Worker of fame from Oswald, having read it. That was one of the things the FBI tried to use to link him to communism.
Yes, most definitely.
So, I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Well, it just mentions in the document, too, what I mentioned before about him being associated with the Committee on Racial Equality and being he was arrested as a freedom rider in Jackson in 61 and 62. He was fined in New York as a scofflaw for having ignored numerous traffic tickets he had received. So, yeah, I mean, this guy obviously didn't believe in paying frivolous parking tickets. I mean, how dare they give...
Well, which is kind of, which is funny because he is a lawyer, so you would think.
How dare they ticket my Cadillac? God damn it. Again?
And, it isn't unreasonable. People need to realize, too, that the civil rights movement, it's so convoluted because of all the various groups that are trying to paint it their own way. But there were some communists who did associate with the civil rights movement who just wanted to help. They were just normal, like Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was one of King's big supporters, but he was a former leader of the Communist Party. But he did show up and do the marches and go to jail like everybody else, and he was called all sorts of names by Strom Thurmond and other people in Congress. And, it did hurt. That's why I think, it also, the Kennedys, too, they had the occasional aide that would be linked to a group that Hoover didn't like, and he would try to go after them and try to link the Kennedys to communism.
Almost definitely. I'm sorry, I was just picturing Mark Lane pulling up, smoking a pipe, and reaching over to his glove box and opening it up, and like 200 traffic tickets fell out. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, you never know.
Here's another one.
But yeah, so one of the groups was called Burning Issues, a youth organization affiliated with Advance, which is another group, both of which have now. And the Communist Party was active for quite some time, not as much in the 60s as they were in, I'd say, the 30s and 40s, because then the FBI had no clue that they were getting involved in all these groups. But later on, in Lane's time, I don't know if it was just more of, obstructionism or using them for their agenda, or maybe he wasn't even directly, they just liked the causes that he was supporting. There's a lot of questions, definitely.
Yeah, and just to clear up something real quick. He actually served in the U.S. Army May 1st, 1945 to November 12th, 1946, where he was honorably discharged with the rank of, after 5 long years in the Army, he finally made it to private first class.
I have a feeling he might have said some things that might have got him in trouble in the Army.
You think? I mean, wow. I mean, that's one promotion in 5 years. I mean, wow. Okay. I don't know what to make of that, but good God.
Wasn't a high achiever in the Army, apparently.
Apparently not. If he was, he got it taken away. But he still got an honorable. So I guess that's something.
He did better than Oswald.
Yeah. At least he didn't shoot himself in the arm.
He didn't throw a drink on a commanding officer, but anyway, that's just some Oswald trivia for you listeners.
Yes, or get bumps on his wiener. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so now if you don't mind, we'll shift gears on that note. Shift gears from the Communist Party. I think we went through most of the information that was attributed, and we have to realize too that there are a couple different informants that gave this information, but they're unnamed or they're redacted. So, we take it with a grain of salt, but they are worthy notations to at least refer to.
Yeah.
And then from there, now this is where it gets a little bit more dicey as far as why he was doing the things he was doing. Like you said, he had, whoever made that quote thought that he had given an alias to some of the witnesses because he was trying to protect himself from the conspirators, but it is true that they could have just found out who this other guy was, and they did, and they ended up finding out it was him.
Yeah.
So the motivations are interesting for people, whatever people want to attribute his motivations to. But according to Helen Markham and the FBI file regarding the matter, Lane allegedly tricked her into an interview posing as a member of the Dallas police. Helen Markham was a witness that saw the Tippit shooting, or saw the man fleeing away as well. And she, according to the report, she's unaware that she was being taped and did not realize it was an unofficial call, that the interview was later used to bolster claims of a second person at the scene of J.D. Tippit shooting and claims of nefarious reasons for James Markham's injury, despite that James Markham was not home during the incident.
Yeah, and thus creating more problems for researchers in the ensuing 50 years since Rush to Judgment.
Yeah, the small, bushy-haired other person is not confirmed by anyone else, and Markham changed her story a few times. So she alone is not, in my opinion, a credible witness to base, all those hopes upon.
Yeah, well, just as a sidebar here, real quick, Carmine, now that you mentioned this small, bushy-haired person, that made me think of something that I just recently saw. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Aha. And I believe I will credit Danny Vasquez for posting this on Facebook. The headline is Boy Chased JFK Car, New Dallas Mystery by Ray Corelli, Star staff writer, Dallas, Texas. It says, did someone try vainly last Friday afternoon to warn JFK that he was only 10 blocks away from a violent death? From out of the assassination aftermath of shock and grief, there emerged a nagging, agonizing mystery. Who was the bushy-haired youth who chased the president's slow-moving car for more than 2 blocks, shouting, "Slow down! Slow down! For God's sake, slow down!" Was he a crank? The world may never know. For just as his furious breakneck sprint carried him abreast of the presidential limousine, an alarmed and angered Secret Service agent spun around, jumped to the street, and hurled the youth bodily into the crowd, where he crashed heavily against the curb. He should have been hurt, perhaps even knocked unconscious, a bystander said. Instead, he just vanished. Joe Laird, a veteran Dallas Morning News photographer, had begun to chase the Kennedy car along Main Street the city's principal shopping district, when he first saw the young man across the street and slightly ahead of him. Man, he was running like he really meant it, Laird said later. I was going just as fast as I could, but he was leaving me behind. He kept hollering, slow down, slow down. He was wearing a black raincoat and a crimson shirt, open at the neck. His coat was flying out behind him. He carried nothing and just kept yelling. I was keeping an eye on the Secret Service men on the president's car because I didn't know whether I should be doing this, running close like that, and they were watching me. Then this guy on the other side of the street finally makes it up to the car, and the Secret Service agent suddenly realizes there's somebody pounding along behind them. He jumps off, and man, he just threw this kid as hard as he could. I tried to see where he went, but the press bus got between us, and then there were more cars, and by the time I saw where he landed, he was nowhere to be seen. He just disappeared. I asked some people where the guy had gone, but they didn't seem to know. Laird said the whole incident puzzled him, but he attached little significance to it until after the shooting, some 2 blocks later, when he suddenly remembered it. He also remembered that another morning news photographer had been perched on a nearby building and could have possibly gotten a picture but when he checked the negatives, he found that the rear part of the car where the scuffle had occurred was not in them. So that's a crazy story that I had never heard before. And this supposedly happened on Main Street, right before, like 2 blocks back from where he turned on Houston. It just, the bushy-haired youth thing kind of jumped out at me,
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, no, no, I had never heard that one either. I would be interested to see, with the reporter, if the reporter said anything else about it, or if there's, a document we can look to see if anybody got interviewed.
Yeah, well, we'll put that in the weird as shit file, and we'll revisit it in the future.
But yeah, so that's unfortunately the thing that happened with Helen Markham is, another one of those. It's just that things got so twisted after time passing, and people inserting themselves into the case and inventing new names for unidentified figures and pictures that, they can't, that's one bushy-haired youth that you have described. I'm sure we could find maybe a couple more if we looked at some of the other surrounding things.
Well, yeah.
So, there's always going to be, it's an unfortunate thing. And then, you got people that'll commit themselves to it. And no matter what you show them, no matter how reasonable you try to be, they're always going to stick with it. So,
yeah, she could have heard this story and, I don't know, put this guy that maybe knew something was going to happen and Oswald together at the Tippit murder scene. And who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, no, and and I don't blame. Plus, once again, it's the events that are going on. This is the shooting of a police officer, so of course, people are going to be stressed. Their memories aren't going to be perfect. Everybody is getting accused, I'm sure, by some officials of not doing a good job as a witness or not saying something that they shouldn't say. So we've got suppression going on as well. So yeah, I could see how some of these things could get morphed into what their current incarnation is.
Yeah, but let's get into some of these other people he lied to.
I would say he was not did not share all the details with them.
Yes, most definitely. Like Gene Hill, for instance.
Yeah. Then there's a FBI report that was made by Gene Hill, where and that was one of the witnesses that testified for the commission, for the listeners who didn't know that, and she additionally confirms Lane used an alias, Robert Blake, with her for an interview.
Yeah, I think that was the name he was using, Robert Blake.
Yeah, and then later on, she figured out it was Mark Lane when he appeared on the show.
Yeah.
And then the same thing happened with Markham, because Markham didn't know who this was. And actually, there's a portion of the document where it talks about at first 2 men, one of them being Lane, who introduced himself as Robert Blake, came to her house with Marguerite Oswald trying to get an interview. And then she ended up she said she didn't have time then, and they left. So she did this phone interview later thinking it was the Dallas police, and it turned out to be Mark Lane. And then Lane used that recording to show other people to try to bolster the case that he was making against the commission. So you add that to Gene Hill, and then you've got, as you know, at least a couple more. Warren Reynolds was another witness that Lane tried to contact.
Yep.
And he called the FBI and told them that he was interviewed and filmed by a man calling himself Robert Blake in March 1966. However, he stated since the interview he learned that Robert Blake was actually Mark Lane.
Yes. And another, I believe, is Lee Bowers as well.
Yep. Lee Bowers was approached by a man calling himself Blake and did not have time to meet him then. But as we know, most of these people are in Lane's later films, so he must have convinced them somehow to do an interview later after he had used the alias.
Right. You know, he...
At least Bowers is, I know. Bowers and I think Gene Hill is. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Is Markham? I think
Markham is too, yeah.
Yeah, so I think eventually he got most of these people to be in his film after they found out who he was.
Yeah, but you never know the circumstances behind that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
They could have had some kind of a legal agreement to, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure
money.
They were paid, I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure they wouldn't have done it unless they were paid in some form or fashion.
Well, especially after the guy introduces himself as one person, then reveals to you later he's someone else.
Right.
You know, it could be for an innocuous reason, but that isn't the most genuine or forthright thing to do.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have had to mea culpa them face to face after that, and was like, "Look, you know, I was just trying to protect myself from, you know, all the crazy stuff going on here because look, they killed this guy, they killed this guy, they're trying to kill this guy, and on and on and on."
Yeah, so I think we definitely have some inconsistencies as far as his treatment of some of the witnesses goes. There's definitely some questions about the communist ties of groups that were connected to the communists. I don't necessarily think it's as nefarious off the bat as Hoover and the FBI did.
Right.
But they could have influenced him, and that's important because even though he wasn't allowed to have an official role, there were always rumors going about communist influences on the case. And communists inserted into the case. Carlos Bringier once erroneously claimed that Norman Redlich, who was one of the members of officials, was a communist, trying to actually compromise the commission's report before it even came out.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, you got to remember, Lane he's a northern guy from New York, which is a very racially, you know, diverse area. Even back then, it was, you know, especially Harlem and all of that, you know, and a lot of this criticism is coming from people from the South, where there's still, you know, civil rights battles going on, and you know, people not liking other folks for whatever reason, and blaming everything on the communists, and that's just how they were in the South back then, you know. And then you have this progressive, you know, far left lawyer coming, and you know, of course he's going to be accused of being a communist or, you know, a socialist or, you know, something like that. But
he did have a lot of connections. You know, it's not to say that they didn't know, kind of like Oswald. You know what I mean? None of those connections, though, if we go into them, might be tenuous at best. But he was leading a couple of groups that were known to be fronts for the Communist Party. But at that point, the Communist Party wasn't as powerful as it once was, so maybe they were trying to influence. You know, I would imagine some people who like to believe the communist scenario with JFK would say that they were trying to keep it away from the communists, but we know that wasn't the case because officials wanted to blame it on them from the beginning, some officials in the CIA and FBI.
Yeah. And now to move the Lane timeline forward a little bit, you know, we'll just recap a little bit, okay? You know, he volunteered to defend Lee Harvey Oswald before the Warren Commission, but they refused him, all right? We know that. He was then retained in 1964 by Marguerite Oswald to defend her son's interests and was the only witness to request an open hearing. These events made him persona non grata with the commission. Later, he worked with Jim Garrison in New Orleans on the Clayshaw case. He has written widely on the assassination. His first book on the subject was Rush to Judgment, which was published in August 1966. And then in 1968, he wrote A Citizen's Dissent. He then wrote the screenplay, or co-write the screenplay for Executive Action, which was a movie that was made back in the early 70s about the Kennedy assassination, based loosely on the events, you know. I forget
which is unfortunate. Well, I was going to say it's unfortunately also the movie that inspired Richard Charnon to make his list.
Yes, the infamous Death List. He actually wrote a screenplay for Plausible Denial too, but it never became a movie. He produced 2 documentary films, A Rush to Judgment and Two Men in Dallas. And he also has written 1 play, The Trial of James Earl Ray. Mark Lane was also active in trying to understand the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination. He was James Earl Ray's lawyer, then later wrote a book with Dick Gregory entitled Murder in Memphis. And, I just find it's mind-blowing that he wanted to be Lee Harvey Oswald's lawyer. He manages to be James Earl Ray's lawyer. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then, he was busy in the 70s, boy. Don't get it twisted, because he was a lawyer for several of these people associated with the House Select Committee on Assassinations. One in particular that I'll tell you about, that I know about, is Robert McCown. Of course, Castro's gunrunner. Mark Lane was his lawyer. Okay. And when Robert McCown was supposed to go talk to the HSCA, Mark Lane wasn't there. He was doing something else, which we'll get to in a second. And Robert McCown was not too keen on talking to the HSCA without his lawyer present. And he told them as much. And he started taking the Fifth Amendment. He started pleading the Fifth every time they asked him a question. And they finally said, look, sir, we're not going to wait for your lawyer. You're not on trial here, okay? You have immunity. You need to answer our questions. Okay, and there's nothing that can happen to you. Your lawyer doesn't. We're not going to reschedule just so your lawyer can be here. There's nothing that he can advise you one way or the other on that really matters. So please answer our questions, which he finally relented and did. But for McCown, Mark Lane brokered, a $50,000 book deal and a $100,000 movie deal for his story. Now, the book and the movie, of course, never got made, but somebody bought it, and Mark Lane was a part of it. Now, the reason Mark Lane couldn't make it, to the HSCA hearings is because he was in Guyana. And you might say, what the hell was he in Guyana for? Well, there was a little place down there y'all might have heard about called Jonestown, or the People's Temple. Okay. Michael Benson noted in Who's Who in the JFK assassination that Lane's role in the uncovering of a JFK conspiracy is made more intriguing by the fact that Lane was a lawyer for Jim Jones People's Temple in Jonestown, Guyana, and managed to be one of the very, very few people to escape the bizarre community just before the massacre. And I mean, running into the jungle, kind of barely escaping the massacre. According to researcher John Judge, in 1986, Jonestown was not a religious community at all, but rather a part of the CIA mind control program known as MK Ultra experiment. What do you think about that, Carmine?
Well, I find that hard to believe.
Well, I find interesting that Mark Lane escapes Jonestown, and I mean, he was one of, I think him and one other guy made it out of Jonestown with the money in hand into the jungle and escaped on foot. And I mean one of the few, because they weren't letting people walk out of there, Carmine. They were shooting.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
Yeah, I've reviewed. Those are pretty horrific. The Jonestown tapes and everything.
Oh yeah.
It was a totally horrific situation that a lot of people, once again, kind of almost in the way of the Kennedy assassination. There's very little known about the specifics at the end, even with the witnesses and what evidence could have been gathered. But Lane, we do know, for a time supported Jim Jones and said that he wasn't a bad person. He didn't have, and we know that not to be the case. So he definitely made a misjudgment at the very least.
Yeah, or as John Judge said, something happened. I mean, because how do you make that many people commit mass suicide unless there's some kind of mental manipulation going on there?
Well, I agree. It's a very cult-like mentality. I just don't think, in my, and I would welcome your thoughts on it too, Rob. And in my experience looking at the agency, if they're going to do something like that, they don't make it so public.
No, I agree.
It would have been a small group. It would have been off. If they wanted to, they would have compartmentalized it. They wouldn't have, like Koresh is another, I think, great example to link towards Jonestown. They were just so sold on what their leader was saying that a lot of them just let themselves be killed for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an easy accusation to throw around, but once again, when it comes to proof of documentation of them, them continuing the MK Ultra program into this, and it being some kind of a branch of that to see what they could get away with, or whatever it might be, we don't know. I just think it interesting that Mark Lane is one of the few to make it out of Jonestown with all the money. But that's just me.
No, and I've heard I've heard multiple people question that and the manner of his exit and everything. And the problem is that unless we can get some detailed reports from other witnesses, and I don't think the whole thing is, I think so many people that might be alive still from that are probably so messed up about the event, it's going to be hard to get any actual testimony out of them.
Oh yeah. So then let's move on to the 80s. We have the Spotlight trial when E. Howard Hunt was suing the Spotlight. I guess Mark Lane was a lawyer for the Liberty Lobby at the time, and either coincidentally or they hired him specifically for his expertise in dealing with elements like this, or people accused of being, associated with the Kennedy assassination. Whatever the reason, I'm sure it made Lane's day to be suing, or to, well, not be suing, but being able to defend the Liberty Lobby against E. Howard Hunt, depose him, and get him under oath, and various things like this. Because actually E. Howard Hunt won the initial trial, then appealed it. And the appeal is when Mark Lane steps in and gets it overturned.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, that was a useful thing that he stepped in and did, as far as showing that legally it is not unreasonable to suggest that people like E. Howard Hunt or Frank Sturgis or any of the other people named could have been part of the assassination. I think the problem happens when people take that and then equate it to not people who were like, but people who are E. Howard Hunt and Frank Sturgis. He didn't prove who killed Kennedy, and he didn't prove that either of those guys was involved in a conspiracy. He just proved that it's not unreasonable to state it publicly.
Right. And I mean, Lane's famous for the assertion, really getting the assertion out there in the American public that, shots were fired from the grassy knoll. He gives us these supposed witnesses. He gives us Gene Hill. He gives us Charles Brim. He gives us Lee Bowers. All these people that the Warren Commission didn't really do anything with, or ask the right questions to, or, take it any further. And, he has done a lot of good stuff for the case, and I'll give him that. It's just that when you look at it in a larger sense of everything that this dude has been associated with over the years, it's a little mind-blowing.
Yeah. And there's definitely, a trail of self-promotion throughout it, which I suppose you can't avoid at some levels, when you get to certain levels of fame or infamy in some, circles, that's going to happen. But I think that, we fairly demonstrated that it wasn't always a very straightforward manner that things were done.
Yeah, and I mean, it's another opportunity for him to write a book about what he did. Okay? Mm-hmm. Because out of the Liberty Lobby, God damn it, the Liberty Lobby, oh shit, I can't say it.
Liberty Lobby. Liberty Lobby.
The Liberty Lobby trial, he got to write Plausible Denial, which was a huge hit because it came out right about the time the JFK movie did, and of course, so did a lot of other books. But when you're Mark Lane and you're writing a book about the Kennedy assassination, and it's going to sell. Believe that, especially on the heels of the JFK Act and the JFK movie, when everything was just, there wasn't a higher time in history, as far as the assassination goes.
Yeah. No, he has excellent timing based on how things have come out and
No
how
doubt.
he's been involved in the community.
No doubt. And he look, he's still alive and kicking. He's living in Charlottesville, Virginia, which is about an hour away from me. And
nice. And give him a call, see what he says.
Yeah, he just had a birthday, just turned 89 years old, which is not bad, for all that pipe smoking and all that stuff he did back then. I mean, it didn't hurt him one bit, and he still looks good. So God bless him,
like I said, that's why I think that we have been in all of our assessments, but I think in this one definitely we have been more than fair to say that there are questions, there are good and what we would consider bad things that have occurred.
Yeah, and Mark Lane, if you ever hear this, I just want to thank you for everything that you've done for the Kennedy assassination and all that, and trying to get Lee Harvey Oswald some representation. But I'd really like my money back for your last book, sir. Was not impressed whatsoever with that. Although it did have a very cool cover, the Auction 7, pretty cool. But yeah, so that's about it, huh, Carmine? Did we cover it?
Yeah, I'd say. Well, I'm sure if you ever want to do a part 2, we can find some more stuff, because that was another thing I thought that was interesting, was that a lot of the files came from Weisberg. That Weisberg was collecting files and actually had a file on Mark Lane, kind of like the FBI did.
Well, look, back then, Weisberg was no fan of Mark Lane. He wrote many letters to people, including Garrison, about being wary of Mark Lane and letting him be a part of the investigation. And look, all these guys, I mean, back then, David Lifton was looked at as the Jim Fetzer of today. Okay, I mean, he was the guy with the kooky. He was the guy with the kooky theories. Okay, that people were dressed up as trees on the grassy knoll shooting guns. Okay, this is the kind of crap that he was spewing back then. But like I said, out of the first generation researchers, a lot of these guys didn't like to work with each other. I mean, Weisberg didn't mind it as long as you were forthcoming and upfront with him and not trying to be shady or hide stuff or, what he would view as an affront.
Yeah.
He didn't mind sharing what he found at the archives whatsoever with anybody. But, he didn't like when people would steal his work and not give him credit. Things like this. And, when you piss somebody off like that, they're going to keep track of what you're doing. Most definitely.
Yeah, I guess. And then it becomes, and it's unfortunate, but it seems that has repeated itself in a lot of instances where you have, researchers, unfortunately, sometimes doing as much research on other researchers rather than the case.
Yeah. And there's a lot of files there if people want to go look for themselves. Oh
yeah. Feel free.
Over at the Weisberg archives, for sure. There's a nice little Mark Lane folder over there. But look, man, I guess that's it. And thank you so much for coming on the show, Carmine. Please feel free to plug away at all your stuff so people can find out more about what you're doing.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You can find the book on tpaak.com, tpaak.com. You can also find it at neamg.com, Neapolis Media Group's website, neamg.com. You can find it in a special section on the Lone Gunman podcast, which is awesome. I truly appreciate that, Rob. And you can see it on Amazon. It's available in Kindle and paperback editions. Two Princes and a King, a concise review of 3 political assassinations.
Awesome. And thank you so much for joining me today, Carmine. I greatly appreciate it. You hang on the line for me, okay? Sure. I'm going to talk us out. Everybody, head over to tlgpodcast.com. where I will put up links to all the documents that we talked about here today and some interesting pictures for you to check out. I guess that's it. I mean, there's a donate link there if you'd like to help out the show. If you'd like to be a patron of the show, head to patreon.com/The Lone Gunman Podcast. Also, modifywatches.com/The Lone Gunman Podcast. If you'd like to get yourself a cool, stylish, hip watch and support the show that way, I would greatly appreciate it. Or just please share the show, okay? It's not that hard, people. Share a link. Just post a link on your social media. I would greatly appreciate it. And make sure you're hitting the like button. It gets me exposure on Spreaker and you know, wherever podcasts are. That always helps. A thumbs up, a like, hit the like button, a little heart button, whatever it is, a favorable review on iTunes. Anything helps, and I would greatly appreciate it to help get the word out. And I will have, another member of Neapolis Media Group on next week, I do believe. Mr. Charles Cliff, I think, is going to come back on the show, Carmine.
That's great.
And we are going to be talking about how Hollywood has treated the Kennedy assassination. And we're going to be getting to talk about, you know, movies, TV shows. I want to really talk about 11/22/63, which I've been watching and I'm enjoying very much so. So make sure you tune in for that next week. That's it. This sumbitch is in the can, beamed up the satellite down directly to your ears, people. This is your boy. Peace.
Oh, another one bites the dust.